the private sector is key to harnessing investment opportunities in Africa, according to a new report released today by a group of leading African and international businessmen. The report was prompted by the global economic crisis and lays out practical steps for making the most of commercial opportunities. And for more on the specifics, we're joined by Richard Harvey, CEO of Aviva, current chair of PZ-Cussons, and also currently an advocate for Concern Universal, the UK-based charity. Richard, thank you so much for being with us here on CNBC Africa. It's a pleasure to have you. So what's different about this report? Because every sort of few months or so, we get a report saying business is the key, business is the answer. How is your report different from all of the others?
I think its big difference is that apart from the academic work, which analyses where businesses work well, it's been critiqued by about 10 of the world's leading business people, with a balance of African and Western businesses, a balance of men and women. And though the result of that critiquing is to try and steer it towards the more practical actions that we need to do to make some of these things happen. Obviously, be great if people thought of other new things we could do, but every section of the report suggests some things that would make a difference.
So basically what you're saying in this report is that in order for African countries and investors, there's two people targeting here,
absolutely,
to make the most of the growth in Africa, both the Africans and the people coming from the outside, it's all about the private sector. Is that what you mean?
I think that's right. I mean, we're fundamentally saying that the private sector is the only way we're going to achieve the Millennium Goals. Remember that we signed up to the change that was going to come about in Africa. The reality is you can't aid a continent into a different style of life. You can only create businesses that work. And there will be a number of ingredients necessary to make that happen. And for example, one of the great opportunities facing Africa is the agricultural development. By 2030, we need 50% more food to feed the people already alive on this planet. Africa is only utilising 20% of its farming land. On that farming land, it only produces 25% of a normal yield. So wherever you start, either by improving what's happening or by bringing more land into active use, you're going to make a big difference, and the business opportunity is absolutely enormous.
So strengthening the agricultural value chain, that's one of your sort of six points that you've put out there. You've just talked about that. What are some of the other specific practical steps that should be taken? Well,
within that value chain itself, of course, there are a number of recommendations to do with better seeds and sustainable fertilizer. We move on to talk particularly about infrastructure. Any of the analysis shows that the countries that have concentrated on improving infrastructure have very quickly moved up the league by some modest infrastructure changes. A number of commentators estimate that African countries could easily add 1% to their GDP, which you and I know is an enormous amount of development. So that's about harnessing private and public sector to achieve more reliable electricity supplies, better telephone links, faster internet, the things that make a huge difference if you're trying to run a business.
What about a couple other points that you mentioned here? One of them is improving the business environment and also making capital, giving better access to capital, making capital more accessible to people. I've spoken to a lot of people who say that 2009 we saw a very challenging credit environment in general. How do you kind of navigate that given the economic constraints that we're dealing with?
I think one of the ways to navigate is the private sector is very inventive. They have to see the risk and the reward process. And indeed, of course, historically, we can now see that there was a much better reward for investing in Africa than there was for investing in a number of European markets. It is difficult. We will need the banks to be there. At the top of the pyramid, we'll actually also need the microfinance or the bottom of the pyramid to enable people to get on that first rung of the ladder, to buy the first $50 you need for the fertilizer that doubles your farming crop or for the initial investment for the crop you're going to take to market. So we've got to attack the pyramid all the way through. Capital is overpriced. There are a number of practical things that could improve that. One thing, of course, is the certainty of title. If we can increase the ability for African businesses to pledge their physical assets so they can access, if you like, credit with security, that lowers the price of it, and that improvement in title ownership could make a big difference.
So what are you actually hoping this report will do? I mean, are you hoping African businesses or people wishing to invest in Africa will look at this report and use it as some kind of a blueprint? What are your aims here?
Yeah, I mean, this is a high-level report, let's be clear about it. I hope what it will do is rekindle and respark the interest from the top and from the bottom. Part of it is about what the G8 or the G20 need to do, how they need to concentrate their aid, how they need need to move away from aid which is non-sustainable and is about disaster relief into aid which enlivens the economy and creates a sustainable process. For example, I've just come back from Nigeria. A very small input to a women's cooperative in the far east of Nigeria revolutionized that village. The women were just milling cassava, and so with a small engine they set up a business that changed their lives and changed their children's lives, and actually in one go achieved about 5 of the Millennium Goals for that community, which is more than we've managed on the top-down process for a long time.
And just before you go, Richard, you mentioned the G8 and the G20 meetings taking place in Canada in the coming days. What message would you give to the leaders gathering there right now?
My message would be the richest continent in the world is Africa. The poorest people are in Africa. The opportunity to reconcile that is staring us in the face. The world is going through a very difficult time economically. When that happens, the best way to tackle a global financial and economic crisis is to develop your least developed asset. And that, right now, is the continent of Africa.
All right, fantastic. Thank you so much for being with us in the studio today.
Thank you.
Thank you to our guest, Richard Harvey, former CEO of Aviva, Chair-elect of PZ-Cussons, and also advocate of Concern Universal, joining us here in our London studio.